Welcome to the Salon at Tokyo College. Today we're very pleased to have Professor HOSHI Takeo, who is Professor of Economics and also Vice President at the university. Thank you, Professor HOSHI, for coming.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to see you.
You are probably world's premier expert on corporate finance in Japan in particular and the financial system. And you wrote almost a definitive book on the Japanese financial system, which is available in English.
20 years ago.
What I found really fascinating is your historically detailed account. And you gave a very clear four-stage process by which Japanese financial system, or corporate financing in particular, has evolved. But of course, it's not a criticism of your book, but the book ends at the beginning of 21st century because the book was published.
Published in 21.
Yeah, yes.
21.
Yeah. So the historical part is completely fascinating, and I learned a lot, and I think interested readers should read the English or the Japanese version. But you really end with what you call the Big Bang in 2001.
Right.
And how do you feel that the succeeding 2 decades has borne out your statement about Big Bang and financial liberalization?
So I think we should clarify what our statement was.
Okay.
And our statement back then was, well, looking at the history was important. And the message we want to make was that the Japanese financial system wasn't special or unique in the sense that you can't understand from using the standard tools of economics, but on the contrary, we can. And also, the Japanese financial system was not fixed over time, and the characteristic changed over time. So having said that, we pointed out that, roughly speaking, in the pre-war financial system, the before the Second World War, the Japanese financial system and the economy in general was more liberal or market-based.
Right. Yes.
Compared with the post-war economic system,
right.
which is more regulated and a bank-based financial system. So what we claimed was, and the reason for that was the shock during the wartime. The Japanese economy moved from a market economy to planned economy during the war, and it continued after the war because having the government involvement helped the catch-up type of economic growth. So the Japanese government found it useful and it worked. But by the end of 1980s, where our prediction starts to come out, by the end of 1980s, Japanese economy started to change. The catch-up phase of the economic growth was over, and the Japanese economy started to mature. And at the same time, there had been an increased voice for deregulation in the financial area, and that started to happen gradually, culminated in the Big Bang. So what we claimed was after the Big Bang, it's more likely for the Japanese economy or the Japanese financial system to move, in a sense, back to market-based, security-based financial system. The corporations would start using more market financing, like bond financing, equity financing, and the household will hold their financial assets not in the banking sector in the form of bank deposit, but more in equity holding or bond holding or the investment trust, mutual funds type of product. So that was, in a nutshell, what we claimed in this book.
Yes.
And the obvious question is, as you did, what happened after that? And after that, this tendency for market financing continued, but very slowly. So for the corporate financing, as we discussed in this book, for the large corporations, the change was already pretty much complete by the time we wrote this book. But after that, so the changes continued, involving small and medium enterprises and also more new forms. but progress has been slow. But the direction has been right. For the household savings, there have been some changes, but progress was even slower. So by the time this book was written, the slogan of savings to investment, which was voiced by the Japanese government and also securities industry, was already popular. But that shift hasn't happened. So as an evidence, we can see that the current administration, Kishida administration, still says the savings to investment is the important thing that must happen for the Japanese financial system.
Yes. Well, in yesterday's Financial Times, there was yet another article. I mean, you are often interviewed for the Financial Times, but it's just that there's a perennial hope that this vast savings of Japanese households will somehow turn into massive investment for the economy. But if I can go back to corporate finance, I mean, you punctured the myth that the pre-war economy was completely zaibatsu dominated or dominated by the state and big banks. But there's a sense in which the post-war growth period, which you claim is very statist, has kind of not quite shed its mark, or at least that's the impression I think most financial journalists have. So, for example, in terms of corporate finance, they often point to the vast hoard of savings that Japanese corporations have. So I'm curious to know what you think about that. You seem to think that it's much more successfully liberalizing than is the common, if you will, perception.
So we're talking about
corporate finance.
Not corporate finance.
Yeah, even in 21st century. No, even now.
In the 21st century.
Yeah, even now, there's a sense that when one reads financial journalism or kind of introductory books on Japanese economy, that corporate finance hasn't quite shed its post-war model.
Okay.
And they point to things like this vast hoarding of cash by large corporations.
Right. So the large cash holding, if you go back, the Japanese corporations didn't hold much cash. They borrowed from the banks. So this was a traditional growth model of the post-war growth. And so the corporate cash holding these days, the relatively recent phenomenon, probably more in the 21st century, maybe in the last decade or so. So that's one change we are seeing. The corporate finance, which used to depend on banks, now the large corporations didn't have to depend on bank anymore, and even now they don't have to depend on external financing anymore, and they just hold on to their cash, which is a problem. But this is not the problem of the traditional economic system, or the financial system, but the trouble we face, or the corporation or the Japanese economy face, as a result of changes and deregulation and environmental corporate finance. So that's one thing.
Right.
So there is a problem. We are not arguing that movement or the shift or the market-based system or the shift out of bank-dominated system is desirable or do not create any problems or the beneficial for the Japanese economy. On the contrary, we argue that was the nature of the deregulation had a lot to do with the banking crisis that Japan experienced in late 1990s.
Right. But again, I'm sorry to stick to this point, but there's a sense in which when one reads about Japan, at least in English language publications, it's the deviation from the hoard or the norm that's emphasized. So, I mean, the most obvious example in finance would be the interest rate. US in particular, but others have been jacking up the interest rate. Japan remains effectively where they were. So I'm curious from your professional vantage point, how you assess that kind of situation.
Yeah, so interest rate is an interesting thing. I look at macroeconomics as well. And we used to study something called liquidity trap,
Right.
where the interest rate zero and it cannot go under. But many of us thought that was just a theoretical possibility until it happened in Japan.
Right.
And then we started to study zero interest rate environment more seriously. And while we were doing that, zero interest rate happened in other countries as well. After around the global financial crisis and so on. So that actually tells me that the Japanese economy again is not unique. It's not special in the sense that something happened in Japan cannot happen in other countries, or you cannot understand the Japanese economy by using economic standard economics.
If I can shift to macroeconomics, which you've also written with your colleague, it's also available in English. So, it's commonly talked about the lost decade. Now people talk about the lost 3 decades. And you give a very convincing analysis of why the Japanese economic growth stalled. I mean, among others, just the impossibility of sustaining such rapid growth, the support for what you call zombie corporations, excess government intervention, and so on. I mean, again, it's not a criticism to say that this book stopped 15 years ago, but have you noticed anything major that's changed in spite of efforts by Prime Minister Koizumi and, of course, Prime Minister Abe to, if you will, more liberalize the economy?
Yeah, there have been some changes. Of course, I wish Abe had done more. So there is another book I did, the book I edited with Philip Lipsky on Abe administration and Abenomics reforms. So there are some chapters on that. So what we find is for Abenomics, setting aside the macroeconomic policy, monetary policy, and fiscal policy, which has some success, if we just look at structural reforms, the picture is mixed. And so depending on your expectation, you can say Abe has done more than I expected, for example, or you can say Abe didn't do all the things he promised to do or he claimed to do. So, for example, if we look at corporate governance, which relates to the issue of financial system, of the corporate financing we talked about, I think there have been some progress of corporate finance or corporate governance in which the several reforms try to increase the voice of shareholders and corporations, encourage or force the corporations to care more about profitability of their business and making it harder for the corporations that are not performing to survive in the market. So all of these, the corporate governance reform had some success in doing that, and the Japanese government is still continuing the corporate governance reforms to make it better. So there have been some changes since we wrote this book in a better direction.
But if I can kind of summarize the ideological effort and the policy effort, it's to liberalize the economy, if you will. Kind of a neoliberal or neoclassical economic solution to the problem. And of course, in 2023, or at the end of 2023, the world seems to be going in the other direction, if you will. That there's a lot of criticism of neoliberal policy, its impact on inequality. There's an effort recently by Japan Steel to buy US Steel. There's kind of a protectionist backlash. And so it's interesting that Japan becomes, once again, a bit of an outlier in this regard.
The tendency to move back from a neoliberal reform and move toward more, depending on
whatever you want to call it. Yes.
Socialist view or new capitalism, which Kishida's slogan as well. So that tendency is observed for Japan as well. Okay. So I think that in that sense, Japan is not special again. There have been a backlash against the economic liberalization, which was going on in the last 30 years or so. But the difference between Japan and, say, the U.S. is the position they were when the people started to have discussion on the validity or effectiveness of a neoliberal model. The U.S., in a sense, in many sense, many people believe went too far, and too far liberal, too much dependent on market financing, those things. The Japan was, as we have been arguing, has been very slow in moving. So the Japan is still nowhere close to the U.S. So some people like me still believe Japan needs a little bit more liberalization. Although it's important to consider those social issues and so on.
Sure.
But at the same, it's not so it's not as simple as the U.S. that we need to go back from a neoliberal type of reform. There are some market forces that Japan has not been using and still can use. So in a sense, liberalization, there is still a room for liberalization.
Yeah, no, I don't think people would disagree with you. It's just more the possibilities that there's been so much rhetoric about liberalizing the economy, but it's hard to say that the policy has really followed, with Prime Minister Abe.
That I agree.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So I had low expectations.
Oh, you had low expectations. I see.
So given my low expectation, I think Abe administration has done a lot.
I see. So it's a matter of expectations.
But still, the Japanese government doesn't seem to believe the market very much. So even though they talk about neoliberal reform, they are not really serious.
So that would be my next question. That yes, the rhetoric certainly is there, but I don't sense either in, if you have policy suggestions or even personal attitudes that people really believe it, be it Liberal Democratic Party politicians, certainly the bureaucrats in the economic ministries, finance ministries. So I wonder if, and I noticed this in South Korea or China as well. People study in the US, so they know the standard macroeconomic models. They talk a good game, but when they, if you will, sit in positions of power, they continue, if you will, with the status quo more than with what they learned.
Right. So I think looking back, Koizumi administration was an exception for Japan, and the one message we want to convey in this book on what stopped Japan from growing is that the Koizumi, even though the Koizumi government and also Minister Takenaka was criticized for implementing neoliberal reform and bringing Japanese economy too far into the more neoliberal form, but the Koizumi couldn't do much. And the problem of Koizumi reform is not that they did too much, but they did too little.
Right.
So that was one of the messages.
Right. I mean, brings back to a question, though, about economics as a field of study in Japan. I mean, you yourself studied at MIT with people like Stanley Fischer and Olivier Blanchard, kind of the architects of contemporary consensus on macroeconomics. But isn't it fair to say, I first came to University of Tokyo in the 1980s, and back then, economics department was divided into two tracks. They still had the Marxist track, and of course the neoclassical or modern economics track. And though the Marxist track is gone, isn't it fair to characterize the study of economy in Japan as much more, if you will, historical, institutionalist, and so on? Or do you think that's changed tremendously in the last?
I think that changed a lot. I left University of Tokyo in the 80s, right? And studied in the U.S. But now, and back then, I would say there were Marxist economics and what you call modern economics. I studied both. I couldn't understand Marxist economics, so I went to modern economics. But currently, if we look at the economics and the School of Economics at the University of Tokyo, where I am, as you said, Marxist economists are gone. There are some good economic historians, but the majority are trained. Majority of economics are trained in the modern economics in the U.S., UK sense. So, and some of us care about institutions and history, which I have some interest in. But I don't think we are the majority. So I think the University of Tokyo has become, in a sense, just another economics department in the US.
One of the more interesting.
And that's a pity.
Oh yes,
Because I think history and the institutional background is really
I think it's much more closer to French or German universities, and I find it very well represented in your work, interest in history and institutions. But I mean, what I found really interesting when I came here is that historically at the University of Tokyo, the most challenging faculty beside medicine was the law faculty, and essentially was a stepping stone toward a bureaucratic career in the state administration. But now it's the faculty of economics, I believe.
Yes,
and it suggests kind of a sea change.
And also, especially management. Within School of Economics, that's becoming more popular.
Doesn't that suggest kind of a sea change in at least the outlook of the younger Japanese?
Maybe.
I mean, do you still wish to sustain the older tradition of training excellent bureaucrats, or is that just simply a matter of freedom of individuals to decide?
It's a freedom of individuals, and so that's the most important thing. I think there's still having said that the Tokyo University is becoming more like a typical economics department in the U.S. Having said that, there are some differences within the U.S. Like UC Berkeley has many economists who are historians and also worry more about the institutions. And it's more so compared with, for example, UC San Diego, where I studied. The faculty there. So in that sense, I think the University of Tokyo still has a fair number of historians and the people who are interested in institutions compared with the average Department of Economics in the U.S. So, and the students seem to be still interested in those. So in the economics department, we have a small number of seminar class, ZEMI, which is considered to be important education opportunity for the students. And in my ZEMI, we look at economic policies of the Japanese economy. So the selection of the students is of course biased.
Of course.
But many of my students are interested in policy issues, and they tend to go into the public sector or the financial system. Those are traditional job opportunities for the University of Tokyo graduates. So
I think I could be completely off here, but I sense that economists who are more historically or institutionally minded tend to go into government work more. I look at my colleagues like Christian Lohmer or Janet Yellen and so on. And of course, they play a major role in shaping US financial and economic policy. In Japan, as I understand it, for a long time, there wasn't much of a move from academia to economic policy, making it the level of ministry. But it seems to be changing with the appointment of former retired professor Ueda and so on. Yes,
governor
of Japan. Is that something that's thought about in the economics faculty that we should get involved more in shaping Japanese economic or financial or other policies? Or are they more academics in this older model?
No, I think at least at the University of Tokyo, there many economists have been involved in policy making, going back to 60s or 70s. And that has been continuing. And for example, the Koizumi government created the Council for Economic and Fiscal Policy. And the first chair of that group was Hiroshi Yoshikawa, who's a former, or who was a professor here at the University of Tokyo, and he has been involved in the policy issues for a long time. My co-author of the Japanese economy textbook, Takeo, was at the government.
Yes, of course, yes, yeah.
So I think the involvement on economic policy has been, well, at least the University of Tokyo economics faculty members have been involved, regardless of their tendency to do what kind of academic work they do, even when they do very mathematical, modern type of economics, many of them care about economic policy.
So I have a final question. I realize you're busy and you have to go, but one of the reasons I think you're busy is that you're the vice president of this university. And I wonder how... One of them. Yes, yeah. Well, you're not the... Are there 20? Oh, anyway.
Yes.
But I'm curious how you find... I mean, you were professor at San Diego, UC San Diego, and at Stanford too, of course. How you found coming back to Japan as a professor and now trying to run and shape the university?
I'm excited. So coming back, coming to here as a faculty member, but also involved in administration. I was the chair of school, the dean of School of Economics until this April, and now vice president. And my role, one of my roles as a vice president, is to deal with or to look after Tokyo College.
Yes.
And I think I can announce this here. Right? I'll be the director of Tokyo College.
Oh, congratulations.
Starting April. So I'm excited to contribute to the transformation of the University of Tokyo, including Tokyo College.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Professor Hoshi, for taking time from your busy schedule. And I wish you very great success in reforming or transforming Tokyo College and University of Tokyo.
Thank you.
Thank you.